Hi, welcome to MoreauKnows. Today you're going to be learning about the characteristics of life from the Essential Standard Bio 4.1 to understand how biological molecules are essential to the survival of living organisms. So last time we learned about the biological molecules essential to the survival of living organisms, but today we are going to learn about the living organisms themselves. When I'm talking about life, I'm talking about everything from bacteria to archaea to eukaryotes, which include plants, fungi, and many other things, including us. Everything in life is based on a universal genetic code. In this case, it's DNA. And so it's made up of A's, T's, C's, and G's. These different combinations of these four letters will allow us to get different proteins. One protein that we have is this jellyfish. It glows. And so what we've been able to do is put that glowing jellyfish DNA into fish and have the fish create that same protein. And then we can also put that into bacteria. And so we can use different types of glowing genes to create this beautiful mosaic here. And the cool thing about DNA is that we can take it from the bacteria to the fish and back and forth, and we don't have to worry about anything else because we all have the same universal genetic code, from bacteria to jellyfish to fish to humans. Not that we would ever test that on humans. This is all based on a central dogma. The central dogma states that in humans and all living things, we all have some form of DNA. And DNA can make copies of itself through replication, DNA replication. And through DNA replication, we can make more and more DNA to pass on to our offspring. When we want to create proteins in eukaryotic cells and in all cells, we have to create RNA. So this RNA allows us to connect to ribosomes, which create proteins. So this right here is called transcription. And through transcription, we make RNA. Now, if we create RNA and through RNA create proteins, that is called translation. Okay? Now, this is the same in all living things. Okay? The same thing happens. Maybe the ribosomes are a little bit different in bacteria than in eukaryotic cells, but we all have the same thing. Watson and Crick were the first people to discover the structure of DNA, but it was Francis Crick right here who actually came up with this central dogma. So once he figured out the structure, he wanted to know what that means into making human beings. So when we make proteins, that is everything that makes us us. Your skin, your hair, your nails, everything. They're all made from proteins that came from your DNA. Everything must have a metabolic pathway. And so for everything to have a metabolic pathway, what that means is that we have to have some energy. And so we create our own energy through what we eat, and some things create them, like plants and bacteria create them on their own. So our energy currency that we all have and is universal between all of us is ATP. The way we create energy is by breaking one of the bonds and create ADP. So it's adenosine triphosphate for 3 phosphates to adenosine diphosphate for 2 phosphates. We're going to talk about this more later. When we eat organic compounds such as carbohydrates, we break those down and breathe in oxygen to create carbon dioxide and water. Well, in turn, those carbon dioxide molecules and water are going to something called an autotroph, which are plants, algae, and a lot of bacteria, which in turn create the organic compounds and oxygen that we can use. But the autotrophs and every living thing all go through the same cellular respiration. And cellular respiration involves glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, oxidative phosphorylation, aerobic respiration, and anaerobic respiration. So they go through all of these same things to create ATP. So every living thing goes through cellular respiration. And the autotrophs can make energy themselves by going through photosynthesis and gaining energy from sunlight. We all need to maintain homeostasis, and to do this, the best way is to have the same concentration inside a cell as in outside the cell. So here's what we call isotonic solution, where if you had a red blood cell, the same amount of salt is going to be inside of a cell and outside of the cell in the water or in the solution, which allows for the diffusion of water, called osmosis, to happen at an equal rate. If this is off in any way, we can have hypotonic solution, which means that the cell is going to have just the influx of water and none coming out, which can lead it to burst. And hypertonic is where the water moves out and no water is moving in. So we have a higher concentration of salt outside the cell than inside the cell. So the cell will actually shrink. Now there's different ways of maintaining homeostasis. You do this when you are too hot, you sweat. And if it's too cold, what do? You shiver. Well, when you sweat, you're releasing water to cool off your body. When you shiver, you're shaking, and so you shake uncontrollably to fire those muscles and to create energy in the form of heat. Dogs do this when they pant, and many other organisms have different ways of maintaining homeostasis. We also use something called a buffer. So our blood is supposed to be at a 7.4 range of pH, and to maintain that, even though we eat acidic things or basic things like coffee, or we drink lemon juice and lime juice and things like that, our blood needs to maintain that 7.4 pH. So a buffer will help buffer that range of the blood moving up or down the pH scale. So it'll try and keep it equal to 7.4 without going too high or too low. So that is another way that we can maintain homeostasis. All organisms will respond to stimuli, so my favorite with this is plants. So here is a plant and it's growing towards sunlight, which if you have any plants at your house you might notice that. But here on the shady side of plants, there's this growth hormone called auxin, and auxin will actually grow faster than the lit side. So that way the plant will start to grow faster and bend towards the light. Well, to test this, to see if that's what it's actually doing, if it's moving towards light or just another stimuli, you can put a cap on it, and if you put that cap on, the plant will just go straight up because it has no reference to shaded and not shaded. To kind of do a control with the cap, they made a clear cap and it responded the same as the original observation. And you can do the same thing if you have a sleeve on it, and once it starts peeking out the other side, it will start to grow towards the light. These twitching plants or sensitive plants, they have really small leaves, but it's really cool because if you touch them, they'll actually collapse and make their leaves very narrow. So this is a response to the stimuli of touching, so that predators will not eat their leaves, because this looks very scrumptious to something that eats this, and this doesn't. And then if you let it rest for a while, it will actually fan back out to absorb sunlight for photosynthesis. In these pictures we have asexual and sexual reproduction. And the asexual reproduction is going to be in the form of here where we can have cutting, We can also have budding and binary fission, which is where one cell becomes two. Over here, we have sexual reproduction, where we need two organisms to make another. And so here are the baby cubs. These are polar bears, they're my favorite. This is a coral with sperm getting laid all on top of another coral. And here we have sexual reproduction in plants, where the hummingbirds are going to transfer the pollen from one plant to another. All organisms need to grow and develop. So here we have a embryo, and that embryo will grow and develop into a toddler, which will develop into a teenager and develop into an older person. This is a human growth and development. Each cell in that body will grow and develop, go through its own little life cycle. The coolest life cycle, I think, is the frog's life cycle, because it starts off as an egg and then moves to a tadpole, and then eventually loses that tail and lives the rest of its life, in and out of water. But at the beginning, it starts in water, has gills, and has to breathe underwater, but then loses that and lives outside the water. Same thing with my second favorite would have to be the butterfly, and the butterfly lives as a caterpillar after it's been developed, and in that caterpillar it eats and then creates a cocoon and comes out in turn as a butterfly. So I think that these are very good examples of how things grow and develop. Last thing I want to talk to you about is adaptation. Adaptation is the ability to change to your environment. The last thing I want to talk to you about is adaptation. The organisms that are better suited for that environment are going to survive and pass on their DNA to the next generation. So here we have the finches in the Galapagos Islands. In each island there's different finch populations that have different beak size for different things that they eat. So they all came from a common ancestor of original finches that in turn were adapting to their different environments. So we have large beaks, and we have small narrow beaks, and we have very large crushing beaks for seeds, and they're all adapted to what they're going to eat. There's many adaptations that all organisms have, and they must be able to adapt to survive, and if they can't, they will go extinct. Thank you for watching MoreauKnows. Now you do.